Yeah. So, yes, everybody, I am Heather, social work background. Just saying, I grew up in a little country town in South Australia, did my social work degree in Whyalla and Adelaide, moved to Sydney. And actually, what I might do is see if I can share screen, but I'm not going to probably be able to put my slides into presentation mode and see my notes. So we'll cope. I'll make guesses. But what I thought I'd do is do a little bit of an introduction of myself and then talk about, I think Julie has asked me to talk because I like to keep putting families and family work front and center
Mm.
in Cicada. So Cicada is a hospital-based program for care and intervention for adolescents, well, children and adolescents with drug and alcohol use. So we work with under 18s. If they're new referrals, they're under 16, really, when they come to us, because if they come to us at 17, we know that when they're 18, we're going to need to refer them on. So we work with quite young students, and it's a hospital-based model. And because of that, we talk about patience. Um, and probably part of my coming into that has been a little bit the frustration that the patient is the young person and not necessarily the family. And I think the whole family should be our client, if you like. So I'll
Mm.
start screen sharing. I'll put my,
Can you
uh,
do it, Heather, or do we need to allow that?
let me see if I can. Have you
Yeah,
got
that's
that?
it. No, it's not up yet, but yes, there it is.
There it is.
Yeah,
Okay. And
we
it's,
see
yeah.
your notes. We can, like, if you've got notes on slides, we're going to be able to see. Oh, there you go. That's a presentation.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's the presentation mode, which means I'm without my slides because, as I said, I'm not at home, but that's okay. We'll cope. So yes, what I've said that I will talk about is recognizing the importance of family in AOD work when working with young people. I haven't got any of you at all on my screen now, so I'm going to feel very lonely.
We're definitely here, and I can see
Yes.
people on most presentations.
Um, So, I also thought about doing an acknowledgement because I do think acknowledgement matters. Acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands that we know as Australia and New Zealand. Acknowledge the beautiful care that our traditional custodians have taken of the land and the waterways, and hope that particularly in Australia, we get better at working with traditional custodians to move together, stand together, move together, move forward together. Sorry. So we're not very good at that in Australia. I think New Zealand does that better.
Mm, yeah.
Um, So I just thought part of me landing where I am now in my career and part of why I bring the approach to it that I do has been a little bit about um, work experience thus far. And so if I just say, I actually started in a disability service. This isn't all the jobs, but as you get older, the list gets longer. So working in an acute psychiatric unit, working for the Salvation Army in an accommodation program for homeless families. People sometimes ended up there due to their substance misuse. I worked for a while when I have got three now grown children, and when they were being born and babies, I worked running groups for Relationships Australia. Um, and some of those groups way back then, ADHD, there was a lot of stigma around ADHD back then. Parents teachers would like go running if they thought they were going to have a young person in their classroom with ADHD. I have a son with ADHD, but chose not to follow through with the diagnosis when he was in grade 1 and grade 2. And his teachers were saying, we think your son's got ADHD. Also men's behavior change groups, also relationships, parenting, like couples relationships, marital relationships, step parenting groups. When I went back into working more hours, I worked in the out-of-home care sector in group homes. For me, that was significant in that oops, sorry guys, in that I got to travel alongside young people who didn't have families in that role. Certainly didn't have families that they were getting care and support from. I got to see the trajectory for young people when family relationships have broken down and how much more difficult that was. I worked at Relationships Australia in an adolescent family therapy service. So for 5 years, my job all day, every day was family therapy with teenage families. And when I was there, I also started my doctorate. So I like the pracademic word, Julie. And you'll hear a little bit more about that research and as well, how it shaped who I am and how I am now. I worked as a school counsellor for a number of years. I went and worked in a uni for a few years. And while I was there, I was teaching, but I also did some research on a juvenile justice program, which was a multi-systemic therapy program, an intensive supervision program. So in the program that I was doing some research on, worked intensively with families of sort of high-end repeat young offenders. And the workers in that program were in the home 2, 3, 4 times a week, supporting parents with their tricky teenagers. And they had a real focus on getting kids back to school or work, keeping them safely, keeping them in a stable living accommodation, and not offending. They were the 3 goals. That research inspired me so much. I spent a lot of time traveling around and interviewing families for hours who'd gone through that program years ago. And at one point, I had interviewed 15 families. 12 of those young people were still in work or school 2 years later, and doing well. So I was kind of really inspired and went, wow, that sounds really cool. And then a job came up as the supervisor of that program. So I applied for it and then worked in that program, having some idea of the good work that they did before I went there. They were defunded with a change of government. So following on from that, I went and worked in school avoidance, because I had another whole new appreciation of how important it was to stay connected to school and family. Worked at Kids Helpline for a while, again, hearing from young people about their struggles, and then Cicada. And I guess perhaps, I wonder what my next slide is. What that has meant for me is that I just keep having reinforced the value and the importance of family in the lives of young people. And what a difficult time families go through, and B, how it's hard for young people to make their way back if tensions remain in the family. So lots of those things have kind of led me to where I am now and my approach, I guess, to what I do now. But part of it, and this comes from doing the doctorate. So part of it is that I think adolescents get a very undeserved bad rap. And, we talk about young people as being risk-taking and rude and unruly. And those quotes have been around in the literature for hundreds of years. Every generation will say the youth of today have never been so rude. And we will continue to say that, I think, going forward. So I think young people get an undeserved bad rap. And I think that in the literature or in our society, the adolescent parent relationship is often presented as one that's characterized by conflict and tension. And often it has, sometimes we've seen that perhaps that's necessary, teens, there has to be a period where young people disagree or fight or argue with their parents to separate from their parents. But I think the literature is moving now to say that to talk more about the importance of ongoing connection rather than the importance of independence. And basically the best predictor for those who've got kids that are not yet teenagers, the best predictor of your relationship with your teenager will be the nature of your relationship with them when they were 5 and 10. If you've gotten along well with them as a younger person, you're probably going to get along well with them as a teenager. It is important, though, at that point for the nature of the relationship to become a little bit more consultative, not so much making all decisions and telling them what to do all the time as we do when they're younger. And I sometimes think that I say this to parents and to kids, actually, sometimes parents are slow learners sometimes, and we continue parenting them as if they were 10 or 12, and they grow up a little bit and they're ready for the next step, and it takes us a little while to catch up and realize that they're ready for the next step. And so we're still parenting them as we thought they needed to be parented last year. Quite often teenagers quite like that idea, but it also comes from a place of love. When we've been loving, caring for kids up until now, it's hard to let go of that a little bit or to loosen the reins. So sometimes it takes us a while to catch up. But I think also because of the way that adolescents are portrayed as rude, parents often get authoritarian as well. So rather than having those communications with their teens about, what do you think? This is what I think. How do we get to where we want, which is how we would with any other adult. We come down hard, or there's a lot of authoritarian stuff that leads to tension or feeds the tension in adolescent parent relationships. So I think you can go into a bookshop and you can there's dozens of books about parenting your out of control teenager or explosive kids or surviving adolescence, or the narrative that we have around that is that it's going to be problematic. And then I think that becomes a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy sometimes. I guess the other things from my research were that warmth and connection at home is probably the biggest protective factor for young people. Harsh, inconsistent, neglectful parenting are, of course, risk factors for young people. So if there's anything that we can do to increase warmth, that's a positive thing. And I can't even remember what the title of my thesis was, but it was something like can multifamily group work or social work in multifamily group work and increasing warmth in parent-teenager relationships. So we, in that group, had probably 5 or 6 families would attend, parents and teens attended in the same group, And the content of the group was around relationships and increasing warmth. And it was brilliant, like all group work is, to see that happen in a group setting. But so at Sydney Children's Hospital Network, part of what is becoming more present is including parents much more in the initial assessments that we do. And also, we've got the medical team and the psychosocial team. So trying very much to make that a less medical assessment, and a more psychosocial, but also a look at families, a look at family relationships, but also having the parents more present also makes a statement that this is a family problem, if you like. It's not a young person problem. And I think when we have parents come in and drop their kid off and we just talk to the kid and the parent sits in the waiting room and then leaves, we're also kind of making a statement that says this is a kid problem, not a family problem. And with my family therapy background, I'm thinking that all people in the family influence all other people in the family. And despite the fact that parents often feel very powerless when they've got a young person struggling with drugs and alcohol, it is possible for them to have some influence, if we can show them how. So that would mean that young people I work with, I'd have parents in the room. Sometimes I do all of my sessions together. Sometimes we'd have some time with young person on their own. Very often I'd have time with parents on their own. My role tends to be that we've got a lot of young people struggling and parents struggling. So other workers will call me in sometimes to support parents while they see a young person. So they might come in together. One worker will see a young person. I'll work with the parents, and then if possible, the four of us would also get together for a little while at the end. But there'd be a lot of work in that. Partly that's just because, as I said, partly parents are desperate, and teary and don't know what to do or how to help and feel completely out of control. But partly that's a little bit because often their understanding of what's going on, they've got one particular story around what's happening, and helping them to see different stories, have new ways of understanding what is happening for the young person, will help to soften them. And as we soften parent towards teen and as we try and strengthen that connection, home is a nicer place to be. Certainly a lot of the young people that we work with spend a lot of time out of home. Sometimes they'll leave and come back 2 or 3 days later. Sometimes, weeks later, sometimes they'll come back. But anyway, so part of that parent support is really about, parents often going to feel a lot of shame that this is happening in their family, might feel some blame of themselves or of their teen. So it's about letting them know that sometimes it doesn't really matter how we've landed where we've landed. We sometimes use a metaphor with a plane crashing on a desert island. It doesn't really matter how or why the plane crashed, but what does matter is what we do from this point on. So some of the other things, so I do sessions for parents and coach the others on including parents and having some nice, warm, circular questions or ways of working with parents and teens in the room together, to help them all change their understanding of what's happening and to make meaning in a more helpful way or a more positive way with each other. Because as long as they hold on to their old understanding, sometimes they hold on to their old ways and everybody gets stuck. Um, we run tuning into teams. So, as much as I'd like to learn more about the family and friends groups, we run tuning into teens for parents at Cicada. So, tuning into teens is a parenting group that was developed by Melbourne Uni, and it's available in lots of places. Lots of organisations run tuning into teens around Australia and beyond. Um, it's about emotional literacy. Um, it's about emotional well-being, and it's about parents supporting the emotional well-being of their teens. Um, but when we run it at Cicada, every parent knows that every other parent in the group has got a young person struggling with substance use. And so they've perhaps all got kids that punch holes in walls or are involved with the police or are staying out. And in that setting, often parents will say things like, I can't really talk to my other friends about this because they just wouldn't understand. And they'll say, I wouldn't have understood 6 months ago if somebody had to describe this scenario to me, I wouldn't have understood it. So being able to talk freely, but the drug use is not the focus in that program. The um, tuning into teens is about um, seeing, noticing an emotion first, and sometimes it's a tricky one, but so noticing an emotion, seeing it as an opportunity to connect, perhaps naming that emotion for the young person. There's a real emphasis on naming, noticing, not judging, talking through, putting words around, and not problem solving. So, in some ways, it's got some little similarities with the 5-step program as well, in that, we're just really, it's really trying to coach parents not to come in over the top, not to be too directive, but to see something and and see what, and see it as an opportunity to connect. And so, if I share little stories as we go, but there was one mum who talked about her daughters. She had a son who was using quite a lot of substances, um, and going away and not being at home. Mum and dad were both separated, but the dad had to often sleep in the family home because they would often get phone calls in the middle of the night that she would have to go and pick the son up, but they couldn't leave the daughter home alone. Dad had epilepsy, so he didn't drive. He couldn't go and do the pickups. It's all this negotiating that's really hard. And the daughter was going to turn 12 and was having a birthday party. The son had turned 17 and they hadn't given him a birthday party. Actually, he'd turned 16. They hadn't given him a birthday party. And he was quite angry. And when they were talking about his little sister's birthday party, and he was like, yeah, well, she gets the party, like, fine for her. And the mum in the group was saying, there was 1,000 reasons in my head that I could have said, well, you didn't get a party because of this and this and this and this. You've broken into the house. You and your friends have trashed the house. I don't want your friends at the house. You've stolen from us. These are all the reasons you didn't get a party. And in the group, and she was actually quite critical often, but in the group, he said that. And I thought, I could see how that might be really hard for you. was her response. I could see how that might seem unfair. Um, I see his frustration, notice the emotion, see it as an opportunity to connect. And they did get to have a conversation about what had happened. It didn't blow up into another argument. And her and him, he did stay home on the night of the birthday party rather than have his family worried about where he was. And him and mum did have pizza um, in the upstairs lounge room while the party was happening downstairs. But we've just seen so many times where parents are frustrated and want to tell their kids that they're frustrated, or B, we've got this little moment perhaps in the car somewhere where perhaps I could tell him, like I've just got this little moment to communicate. We're both getting along okay, and I just really want to drive home, tell him what's the error of his ways, or take the moment to, in this well-meaning, loving way, um, address the substance use, but learning not to, and learning to build connection, um, so that they can hear more about what's happening in their teenager's life, understand more about what's going on for them. So tuning into teens, we run it according to the manual, but because we run it where we run it, the stories they're bringing are often, we've had a tough week, so and so was arrested twice last week, or so and so was picked up and for shoplifting, but he was carrying a knife, or um, it's a program where we're not teaching them how to solve the problem. We don't have a magic wand, but we do often over time see a real change in connection between parents and teens. And when I was at Relationships Australia, we would say often, if you have no relationship, you have no influence. And sometimes building the relationship has to happen first before you can increase the influence that you have on their behavior. And sometimes for parents who are feeling really powerless, to be able to notice that if they do something different, it changes the way that interaction unfolds, and it changes the tone in the house for the rest of the night. So to be able to feel a little less powerless. We do family therapy. We've got a one-way screen at Cicada. So sometimes if somebody else is stuck with a young person and family that they're working with, I'll do a family session, either with the other psychosocial person in the room with us or with them behind the screen. And the beauty of that is, shouldn't assume that people know how a one-way screen works in family therapy. We that's my bad. It sounds odd. We'll show the family the setup. It's a little bit like being on TV, where they're doing the identifying somebody or watching an interview. They'll know who's behind the screen. We very quickly forget about the screen. The screen is probably more daunting for the person running the session, who's hoping that the team behind the screen aren't going to think I'm an idiot. The family forget that the screen is there. We would have a family session that also is designed to release more information, if you like, into the family system. So I would often meet them all at the same time, do a bit of a get to know you with everybody, and what are you most worried about with everybody. And it's tricky for, you will often have parents that are angry with a young person, or a young person that's angry with their parents. Sometimes it's the young people that say, yes, I want a family session. They quite like being able to talk and say what they can't normally say. But I'm going to deliberately ask questions that lean into what what's hard for them and why. And I would do that with parents and young people and siblings. Um, if if you hate your mum, but she's sitting there crying and saying, "This is what's hard for me and why," even if she seems like a critical taskmaster at home, again, that will soften people in terms of going, "Okay, it's not because she hates me." Um, and likewise, when you've got a young person who's sitting there crying, or getting upset in response to somebody else being upset, um, again, it releases information into the system. It helps change meaning around what's happening. And it helps it also to sit not just solely within one member of the family. There's not blame in a family therapy session. Um, so, and then sometimes what will happen is the family will go and sit behind the screen. And then the other person who's been sitting there might come in and share their observations with me in the room. The family get to watch that conversation from one step removed. Um, and there's often a, wow, this mum is working so hard, or gee, I could really see Billy care for mum when she was talking about that. They'll talk about what they're seeing from behind the screen. Um, the family get to come back in and just say what landed and didn't, and then go off, often feeling very touched. It's generally a very positive process. Um, on one occasion, we had somebody get upset with their sibling um, during a little break. And so they got to sit behind the screen and watch the rest of the session and hear a formulation. Sometimes we'll do a reflection with two members in the room that the family watch. Sometimes I'll just do a formulation and give that back to them in the room and they'll leave. So family therapy, I do that across the network. So we've got hospitals in Randwick and Westmead. And sometimes it will be a 1 or 2 session thing, but having the other psychosocial person behind the screen means they can work with everything that comes up in that family session. It's all there for them to continue um, having in their work. Um, but generally, it's even in team discussions, we will sometimes, people will say, oh, mum said she doesn't care, so she's not coming into hospital. And so sometimes I'll be aware that people are now constructing a story or an approach or a way to work with this young person, that we've just sidelined somebody or disregarded somebody, or um, written a story and then started to act as if that's the reality, without an awareness of what's going on for everybody else in the system. People don't live in isolation. Um, so taking into account the system that they live within, and also harnessing the supports and the resources of the family, um, because they are going to be there for those who have family 24 hours a day. We are not. If we can help families to become less reactive, if we can um, soften in a family session or even in individual sessions, we might give homework that it might be tuck-in time, for example, that we might say to a parent with the young person there, to say they need to go and sit with their young person for 5 or 10 minutes and just listen. That they're here and go, how's it going? That young person can know that if they want, they can take that 10 minutes to talk about anything that they want to talk about, and that the parent is not allowed to respond at all, because sometimes we sit and wait for our turn to talk. Or we sit there thinking, yeah, that's not going to happen, because they have to sit and listen, and they can go away and they can respond later that day or the next day and say, this is what I think and why. Um, there's no compromise on safety. But if a young person's saying, I really want to do this and this is why it's important, and, I want to go to this party, um, it might be, or, oops, I got caught, I got picked up by the police. Whatever it is, they can take that opportunity. Sometimes they'll not talk very much, but if it becomes a safe space, then sometimes they'll start to talk about things, knowing that there is not allowed to be a response in that moment. We'll say to parents, and sometimes to would use it with couples as well. You've got to literally bite your tongue, sit on your hands and shut up and hear it. Try and hear it from the other person's point of view, but go away and process it from the other person's point of view
Mm.
before you're giving back your response. And that really listening to somebody in that way is a gift. And it's a gift that we often give to other people outside of our families, but don't necessarily give to people in our close network. So giving the gift of really listening and really trying to understand. So we would give homework. Sometimes they might have to do something together. But what we would be doing would be trying to shift something in the relationship, the space between them, to help them be able to show up for each other and help them be able to be resources in solving those problems. And yeah, what else have I got here? Oh, um, I don't know what's coming next. Um, that's a little bit more, family members influence and are influenced by each other. It's not always equal power and influence. And that's probably speaks a little bit more to what I was saying. When a family system is under stress, they're stuck, they're standing still. The tendency is to stick to one description of the problem and thus one meaning, which means one response. When each person in the system holds different meanings from others, the new meanings might emerge through conversation. And those new meanings can be the difference that make a difference. Without conversation, meanings stay standing still, and that they are created through our language and actions. And so, yeah, I mean, it's really just about taking any and all opportunity to increase connections in families. Yeah, that's so maybe if I stop sharing. Um, don't know. I did say it would be quick. Don't know, but that's, yeah, probably a little summary of trying to influence. In some ways, I sometimes think at work, I feel like I'm trying to turn a ship, in that I'm trying to take this very medical model and over time get them to think differently. And I think over time as well, I think many, many moons ago, teens were always seen with their parents. And then we had this period of time where the parent was very much shut outside the room. In services, we saw teens without their parents, and that was deemed to be the right thing to do. And now I think we're coming back to recognizing the importance of connection in those spaces. But yeah, thoughts, questions?
Heather, thank you so much. I think even hearing your journey and how you got to where you are today is just fascinating and inspiring, I have to say.
Well, yes.
Really inspiring. And I just really value your commitment to families in this space. And I imagine it's very difficult in an inpatient setting, really. But just even listening to talk again about family systems, and it's just those different lenses on a situation, isn't it? Because when you're just coming at it from the medical model, that's all you're going to see. But if you're coming at it from a family
Mm.
systems therapy model. It's so different. Um, yeah, and I love the plane metaphor. I think I'm going to start using that. I haven't heard that before, and I loved hearing the stories. The all your the teens and working with the parents, all those teens are in hospital. Are they all in?
No, no, sorry. So sometimes people will be referred as an inpatient, but
Yeah.
basically anybody, people can self-refer.
Mm.
People come to us anyway, and we're an outpatient clinic.
Right. Fabulous. Yeah. Okay, well, I'm not going to dominate. Does anyone have, well, you got a lot of love hearts and claps, and I hope you saw those.
Oh,
Um,
no, I didn't. All I could see was my screen. So I don't know what they were. I mean, sorry, my slides. All I could see was my presentation. Um, but yeah, it's I love, like I said, would love to know more about the family and friends and also the 5 step and have loved the 5 step. And I think at one point, Julie, you said something about somebody in Canberra doing some research on whether family members going through the 5 step program would have an impact on their family members' substance use, which yeah, Pauline can smile and say something in response to that if you want, because I'm certain that it would.
I
um,
can just say from our research is that
yeah.
3 months after we've done, so our family members done the 5 step program, we send out an online survey which is answered by about 75% of people who have done the 5 step 3 months earlier. And one of the last questions is, has the behaviour of the focal person changed since you did the 5 step 3 months previously? What we're finding is that family members are saying around 50% are saying that the behaviour of the focal person is better or much better since they've done the 5 step 3 months previously, which is huge. It's not part of it's not a dedicated question, but it's one that we were really interested to see what the impact of supporting impacted family members is on the focal person.
Yeah, and I think that research, Pauline, your experience is borne out in other research as well, isn't it? And I think from a family therapy perspective, we know if you change relationships and how people are responding, reacting to one another, then those relationships improve. And I think it's also Pauline David Best's, is it?
Yeah,
David Best's
yeah,
research,
yeah.
he actually talks about the
Huge.
importance of connection as well. So the focus is really quite valid. Um, any other questions or comments that people would like to make? Yes, go, Helen. I see you.
The purpose of our organisation is not about research, but we are full of stories that echo exactly what you're saying, Heather, and thank you for your presentation just about the importance of the family having connection, that statement you made about people thinking no one would understand what they were going through. I mean, that is entirely what we're about, is having people get together and share their experience, strength and hope is what we call it. And talk about how that is a bond that helps them get through some difficult times and learning about how to interact. And that connection, we know for sure with our younger members, that's one of the things that they find absolutely important. And it doesn't really matter, it's not a family member for them. If they have a connection with someone they trust, could be their basketball coach, could be their next door neighbour, that makes a huge difference to them in terms of their recovery. Just to have somebody who's in their corner. And, for some of our families, they can't have a parent or a next of kin that's that person. But we know from our experience the importance of that. So, but thank you again for your presentation. It was fantastic.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Yeah, and just for me sometimes as well, the parents having someone in their corner, and us really recognizing that so many of these parents are going through a mini hell, sometimes a mini hell, sometimes just hell. Sometimes they've got young people with, machetes in the wardrobe, or they're drug dealing from home, and sometimes there's younger siblings. Parents are just they feel very isolated. They need support too. so yes, so that's the big turn the ship. It's like we've got a whole family here who's in trouble. We don't just have one person in trouble when we've got a young person with a substance use disorder. Um, got a whole family that should be our client, and doing more of the, actually I think doing more of the parenting support stuff in their own right, irrespective of whether a young person engages with the service or doesn't engage with the service.
Yeah.
Even encouraging that to be more of a valid referral and valid work for us to be doing.
It's fantastic, Heather. Yeah. Any other questions? Oh, Mark, sorry, you've got your hand up. Did you want to say something?
Yeah, no, thanks for the presentation. I was just curious around, because I can't remember who did that research saying that average length of time for families to seek help is 5 to 20 years into the journey. And I'm really curious about how do we get to families earlier, and what you're talking about, working with adolescents with substance use, and just wondering if there's any tips or tricks you've found around marketing the program to get those families to engage early.
I think that is something. So Cicada was a smaller program. It's been around for 20 plus years, but smaller. And when I worked in schools in Western Sydney, where we definitely worked with students with substance use problems, I had no idea Cicada existed. So no, I don't, is the short answer, but it is something that I think that we could all perhaps talk about in this network as well, in terms of how do we get better at supporting families.
And the other part to that, I think, is supporting the kids of parents with substance use too, how to connect with them. And, even being able to say that we've got a model, because we had a recent anecdote just probably a week or two ago. Our youth worker was going into the school, seeing a young person for vaping, because schools sort of have that pretty zero tolerance policy. When he met with her and talked with her, found out that dad was using heroin and mum was using something, I can't remember what, but the kid had a lot more emotional issues going on. The vaping was just kind of like a small part of the story, but it was a great, because it was the first time she felt she could talk about that stuff with someone. And I thought, oh, gee, there's probably a lot of kids out there that are suffering in silence. And even in my own family, I know of someone with an alcohol use disorder, and the kids, we didn't know about the level of alcohol use and the problems. And so those kids sort of navigated that journey without support. And I think, I wonder if there's something more we can do in that space.
There definitely is. And Cicada has 3 streams. So we have the adolescent team, which I work on. We have a FASD stream. So we do assessments for fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. They've got more than a year's waiting list now, and you need to be able to confirm alcohol use in the parent during pregnancy, before they will even start that process. That's gaining traction, I think. Certainly Australia-wide, we're getting more recognition of fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. And we also have a family team, which is for young people who are impacted by their parents' substance use. But that is a team of 3 people. One of them being a doctor who works 2 days a week. So that's a pretty small team, but and so sometimes we're working with those families in the context of the parents' ongoing substance use or intermittent substance use. But yes, I agree, lots and lots of young people out there living in a little bit of crazy and instability due to a parent's substance use.
Yeah, big issue, under-resourced. Lucy, did you want to say something?
Yeah, thank you, Heather, for sharing, and for sharing as well about your journey that led you to doing this work. And it sounds like really, important work that you're doing and involving the whole family, which I think is like a great shift kind of in the culture of seeing, how to support those people. I guess with family and friends, it's kind of similar in that it shifts like that center of gravity away from the person with the behavior of concern and back to the person that provides support or the people that provide support. So they build up their capacity to cope with and respond to problem behaviors, in the same way that, the person with the behavior would be coping with that. And I guess what I like about our family and friends program is that it is kind of in line with family systems therapy where it's a unit, they're not in isolation to each other. They respond to each other. It's an emotional unit. Even if it is dysfunctional, there is a way that people respond to each other and have their own responsibilities within that unit, whether or not they're cognizant of that. So yeah, I really like, with our family and friends program, it is about the person who is offering support and, not just things about how to have self-care and things, but also assertive communication, learning how to effectively communicate things using I statements, less blaming language, things that just kind of facilitate more open and, kind of generative conversation with someone who might be in those sort of states or undergoing those sorts of issues. So I really like the Family and Friends program for that because it kind of allows people to understand what their role is, while also letting them know, they don't cause the problem, they can't change the problem, but they have a role in that system as a support person. So yeah, it was really enlightening to hear about the work that you're doing. And I like that it particularly aligns with that sort of family system sort of thinking.
Ah,
Thanks, Lucy. Does anyone else have any comments or questions?
Can I ask a quick clarification question, Heather? I think you said at the very start, do you not take 17-year-olds? Did I hear that right?
um,
Only because
mostly
I've just
you've got
had a
what?
client that's been coming into my mind hearing you talk, and I'm like, ooh.
Mostly no, because there are other services that will work with young people up to 25. Sometimes, depending on what the issue is, depending on how motivated they are, and depending on how far through 17 they are, there's a bit of flex. But mostly we'd be feeling like we might be doing them a disservice by starting to work with them and then referring them on.
Yeah. Okay. Great to know. Thanks, Heather.
Wouldn't it? You could always ring there.
Yeah, you can. Yeah, give me a buzz.
Okay, no other questions, no comments, no.
I didn't have any questions, but yeah, I just wanted to echo it was a really great presentation, Heather. Thanks for that. And very inspiring, as Julie was saying. Yeah, I can definitely see your passion for helping everyone, really. Helped a lot of different groups of people. But yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you. It does feel like a journey that's come together, and it does feel like I've been a bit blessed to along the way learn the lessons about like for the parents, really they've got to have the patience of a saint sometimes and the strength of, I don't know, an ox, and you don't always have the patience of a saint in the moment, and it's great in hindsight, but we don't have hindsight in the moment either. So for but the multi-systemic therapy and going, okay, school is a really important part of the picture sometimes, or having something meaningful to do if you're working with older people, and not just thinking substance use, but going, okay, what are you doing each day and who are the people in your corner? And it's that systemic thinking that makes us go, what is the broader picture? And sometimes I would get a big piece of paper and put in the middle what contributes to poor old Billy's going to get picked on, but what contributes to Billy's substance use? And there might be, there might be anxiety, there might be depression, there might be instability, there might be not having something better to do, there might be being up all night with friends and sleeping during the day, or there'll be a lot of things that will be part of that picture. And sometimes sometimes we would do that with the family in a family session and go, okay, what are all the things? I mean, in one family session, access was on there because the kids smoked at home. And in that case, his mum and dad both had they'd had their own journeys. They'd both been addicted to heroin for significant time, but had both been clean, for if he was 16, I would say for 18 years. But they also very much understood the struggle of quitting. And they also very much understood the need to do it in your own time. And so on one hand, they were wanting to help, but on the other hand, I don't know, they were struggling to find out how. But when we did this big brainstorm of all the things and we went, okay, of everything on this page, what kind of needs to change for you to be able to stop using? Because we could go, oh, he needs to get a job, or he needs to get his anxiety medication changed, or he needs, but with all of them, what is the thing that most needs to change? And they went, the access. He did too. He said, well, as long as I can use it, as long as I can get it, he used at home, then I'm going to smoke. And for his parents to be part of that conversation and kind of go, okay, does that mean you want us not to be okay with that? And he said, well, as long as you are, I'm going to smoke at home. So, sometimes having those conversations in that way, it's really non-blaming. They're putting all the information out there. They're coming up with what they think will work. But
yeah, I think that's something that you said a couple of times during your presentation, just finding ways to release new information into the system, which can create new meaning and a new focus for the family. And not necessarily being stuck in their dominant story or a blaming story, if you like. Yeah, so powerful, isn't it? It takes you back to a process. It's a process of allowing that or facilitating that to happen.
Yeah. And I know as well when I went from being in a family therapy program to working in a school, I felt hamstrung. Because I didn't have the family to work with. I've got this 15-year-old who's struggling, and I went, there's only so much I can do because they live in the context of their family, and without that,
yeah, so true. And the families there on either side, and the services we're just such a small component at the end of the day. Heather, thank you so much. I think you can hear we've only had one person leave, which is really unusual to the end of the meeting. So that's great. Tells you how.
Well, thank you. It just, that's very sweet, everybody.
Well, we're very grateful to you.